give a warm welcome to everyone who's here and everybody who might be viewing this afterwards. On behalf of myself, Kathy Bishop, and my colleague Selena Kunar, and our special guests, Michael Lavis and Jim Temple from Creative Options Regina, we're just wanting to give you a really warm welcome and to let you know that we're excited to have an informative, engaging session with you all today. So before we officially begin, what I'd like to do is take a few minutes to set our online space. So I will set this in this way in terms of saying, just to let you know, we will be recording. We are recording already. And our hope is that today's session will be engaging and energizing, so that feel free, if you want, you can turn on your video, you can turn off it. And if you have the opportunity to speak, you can use both your video and your audio, or just your audio. But please keep your audio muted for the better audio experience of everyone else if you're not speaking. And remember to unmute yourself. How many times these days do we go, you might be on mute if you wish to speak, because we will have space for a Q&A to talk. And so we really invite you to select gallery view if you want to see who else is in the room, if we're all together, and to recognize that we really want to have an interactive dialogue, so that you'll see there's the chat button and you can use your chat, or down on the bottom you can also see that there's the raise hand function in terms of reactions, if you can press that. So again, if you want to raise your hand, once we get into the Q&A, you also have that ability. And so I'll be monitoring the chat, as well as Selena will be helping out. But as always, if there's something that gets missed, please do let us know, and so that we can't leave without hearing your questions in terms of that. So at this point, I would, now that we've kind of set our online space, I would like to begin our session today with our traditional land acknowledgement, that I would like to acknowledge the traditional lands of the Kosupsin and the Lekwungen families, upon which the lands upon which Rural Roads rests, and which we have the privilege to live, work, learn, and play on. And also recognizing our virtual reality, I want to acknowledge the lands and peoples wherever you may be. And at Rural Roads, we begin our meetings and presentations or events with this sign of respect, as a way to acknowledge the rich history of these lands and families. And so today's session is the alchemy of transforming organizations. And this is really an opportunity to spotlight Creative Options Regina, and then also to hear the why, the what of leadership education. So we'll be ending at 1 o'clock, but to sort of begin, I'll do a little bit of a framing, and then we'll turn it over to Michael and Jim, and then we'll also turn it over to you with questions and come back. So in terms of Creative Options, so they are senior leaders, and they've risen to the challenge that CORE has been recognized as one of Canada's healthiest workplaces and one of Canada's most admired corporate cultures. And they've been named the 4th executive year as one of Saskatchewan's top employers. And so in a moment, before I turn it over to them, I'm going to invite them also to speak a little bit deeper about who they are, but we have a real privilege and treat to be here in terms of with them. So in terms of looking at the alchemy of organizations, we know that across the globe, there's been a declining trust in leadership. Back in 2017, Edelman identified a loss of trust in leaders across all sectors of business, NGOs, media, the government. And despite a high lack of faith in the system, Edelman also noted in 2019 that the relationships with locals employers is still strong, and that employees are turning to their local organizations and expecting senior leaders to step up, to be trustworthy and lead the way to make a difference. And so in terms of thinking about trust and transformation, we know that in these extraordinary times, we really need leaders to create that calm in the culture and move forward on mission and to optimize trust and environment so that they can really look at making important changes in the world through the organization and through what you do. And so some of the ways to do that, what Edelman shows in terms of is looking at values, is looking at the future, looking at purpose, at organizations and societal actions. And so really to look at how to do this, it really depends on people who are modeling the way. And that's why at this point, I'm really excited to turn it over to Michael and Jim to speak about their own experience in terms of how they've risen to that challenge and what implications have happened. So at this point, I'd like to turn it over to you, Michael.
Thank you, Kathy. Jim and I are both quite excited to be here with you all here today, and thank you for the opportunity to share a little bit about our journey. And I guess just to introduce myself to you all, my name is Michael Lavis. I'm the CEO at Creative Options Regina, and I've been with the organization since its inception in 2009. I have a background in human security and peace building. I've spent 12 years working in the international development sector and relocated back to Canada, to Regina, to help launch CORE in 2009. Originally born in Calgary, but raised in northern Manitoba, just outside of Flin Flon, on a little place called Lake Athapapaskow, outside by Baker's Narrows. Nonetheless, I'm going to let Jim introduce himself as well, and then we'll share a little bit about our journey here at CORE.
Sure. Thanks, Mike. Just looking at our bios there, I need an updated picture because I've got a new haircut since then. So good to see everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Jim Temple. I'm the COO here at Creative Options Regina. And like Michael, I've been here since CORE's inception in 2009. I was born and raised in Regina, and actually my education led me to the world of finance. And after about a year in that field, I decided it really wasn't for me and just found a lot more joy in the nonprofit sector and the work we're doing here at CORE. So nice to meet everyone.
So I imagine some of you, I recognize there's a few familiar names that have shown up on the participant list, but there are many that I don't recognize. And it looks as though there are several folks joining us from Alberta. So welcome. For folks, you're probably wondering, what is this organization called CORE? In an essence, we are a nonprofit for impact charitable organization in Regina, Saskatchewan, and we were founded in partnership with the Ministry of Social Services in 2009. The organization itself, it provides support to adults and youth experiencing intellectual disability and mental health challenges. Often the folks that we're serving, they have a concurrent disorder, and they touch on multiple systems of support, making them complex in the eyes of the system. Rooted in a culture of gentleness, we are based on a philosophy of care known as gentle teaching. And I think what's unique about this philosophy is that we've taken this philosophy of care and we've actually woven it through the fabric of the organization, woven it through its policy, its governance, and its HR practices and processes. It's not just an approach to providing care. And the premise of gentle teaching centers on ensuring that people feel safe and they feel valued. And in essence, we're putting relationships at the core or at the center of caregiving. Now, through the eyes or through the lens of an employer, it means, do our employees feel safe, right? We're talking about psychological safety. And do they feel valued and feel respected? Right? Our work's important, right? We're in the business of people, right? And I believe we would be misguided if we chose to focus solely on those whom we're contracted to care for, right? As an organization, we made an intentional choice to nurture the people within the organization. And that in itself has been a game changer. In fact, early in our journey, that decision to focus on those who are providing care um, became absolutely critical, in the sense that I believe that if the people we employ are doing well, they will in turn provide the utmost care to those whom we're contracted to care for or entrusted to care for. So right from our early onset, we were really looking at what was this experience, or what is the experience like for our employees? Do our employees feel safe? And do our employees feel valued? And this has really been the path that we've taken over the past 10, 11 years. The organization continues to grow. This past year, for instance, throughout the COVID-19 pandemic, we've actually experienced a growth of approximately 30% in terms of our services and in size. Today, we are considered to be one of Saskatchewan's largest service providers in the disability services sector, serving some of the province's most challenging people in care. We employ just shy of 300 people in Regina, and the average age of our employee is 29 years old. Our annual operating budget is just shy of $15 million. And all of this has been nurtured over the last 10, 11 years here. Jim and I, of course, as we mentioned, we've been here since the beginning. And I think there's one word that you're going to hear throughout our discussions today, and that word is intentionality. Because we've been very intentional in nurturing our culture at CORE, and Royal Roads has actually been instrumental in helping us to acquire the knowledge to develop and refine the framework that we use, which has really contributed to our growth and our success. Jim, I'm going to let you share a little bit about our Royal Roads journey with everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. So as we got started, Michael said, our inception was in 2009. And so operating in, this culture of gentleness and the philosophy of gentle teaching, we felt like we had a good foundation for, kind of working with values. But as Michael and I started our Royal Roads journey, I guess that would have been in 2016 when we enrolled in the values-based leadership program through Royal Roads. And it was really wonderful because, for myself, it helped me, first and foremost, kind of, name my own values, what was important to me, but then also as an organization, how are we going to refine these values? Because we had, at that point in time in our earlier years, we had organizational values that we, had up on the wall, but they were more so created by like the senior leaders of the organization and our board of directors, and it hadn't really come from all of our employees. And so after, as we were going through the values-based leadership program, and our growth was exponential at that point, we wanted to rework our values. So taking the values-based leadership course allowed us to rework those values, and we were able to reach out to our entire organization, all of our employee base at that time, and find out what is important to them, what do they want to see in their workplace, how are these values going to resonate, and how are we going to lead from a values-based perspective. So through that process, we did we tweaked our values and really attach some behaviors to those values so that we could actually carry them out in practice and people could see the values on display. So what we were able to do was we came up with a little acronym for our values. So it spells out the word imagine. And so our values stand for innovation, making a difference, autonomy, growth, integrity, nurturing an inclusive community, and engagement. And we've attached, those behaviors to what each of those words means to us. So that was a really good, taking that values-based leadership program to start our academic journey was really great for us and helped lay that foundation of what we already knew and what we were going to go on to do. As we carried on with Royal Roads, we took another postgraduate certificate in corporate social innovation, and then we bridged into the Master of Arts in Leadership program. And as we were, as we got going with the Master of Arts in Leadership program, part of that program is doing an engaged leadership project. And being that we had this values background, we wanted to explore a value or something values related in our leadership project. So what I chose to do was explore that value of trust, because that was something I'd been reading a lot about trust and hearing a lot of, statistics, as Kathy mentioned earlier on here. And actually kind of the inspiration was Michael and I we were at a conference in Toronto for Canada's top employers. And one of the presentations, they were talking about, employee experience, and they gave some wild stats of like something to the regard of about 30% of employees actually, trust their employer and think that the employer cares about their well-being. And on the inverse of that, the employer, about 80% of employers thought, yeah, I care about my employees and I want good for them. So a real disconnect there. And so that was kind of where the inspiration struck for me, that I want to do my project on exploring trust within my own organization of CORE. So over the course of, working through our engaged leadership program, I was able to engage with my own organization, do a varying amount of engagement methods with our employees, and we had some really good participation. We had probably around about 100 people that participated in some online survey and some focus groups to really sort of give their perspective on how they perceive trust, what's important to them, and just what they want to see when they come into work every day, and maybe some things that they don't want to see. So what I was able to do as I compiled my data and worked through it, I was able to see what is important to our employees. And very similar to how we did that that imagine acronym for our values, I was able to kind of do a similar thing around trust. So what I did kind of learn through my findings is that trust at CORE means T is transparent communication, R is recognizing my voice, U is understanding and empathizing, S is supporting and nurturing, and the T is tackling the gossip. And these were all sort of based on things that we learned and the feedback of our employees. So this is something we feel like we can really put this into practice. And when things are going great or maybe not going so great within the organization, we can look to these these trust factors and these values, and really hopefully that's where we can kind of transcend ourselves forward and work through anything that we're kind of facing. So we're kind of getting to the end of our Master of Arts in Leadership program here. We're just in our last class, and we're really excited to kind of take what we've learned from our project here and start to put it into practice within the organization. I think that's all I got at the moment. Mike, do you want to dive into yours or add anything on that I might have missed?
For sure. I find it interesting. It's actually really quite fascinating when we talk about values, in that, we hear a lot about the importance of culture these days. It's sort of the new buzzword, right? Talking about culture, culture, culture. But what drives culture, right? And that's something that I've always wondered, was what actually drives that culture. And what I've learned is that it's a shared set of values and beliefs. And it's actually those shared values that actually cultivate or nurture that culture. So when we talk about transforming cultures, we talk about the importance of workplace culture. Really what we're talking about is, what are those shared values that we have as employees of that organization? And more so, what are those perceived organizational values that employees might have of the organization? And when Jim spoke about the opportunity for us to really engage all of our employees in understanding those values, it was really insightful in that, yes, in 2009 we crafted a set of organizational values, and in many ways they were an extension of my own personal values, because at the time there were 10 employees working in the organization, and working together. And as we grew, I often wondered, well, how do these values actually resonate among those who we partner, and those who are employed and working together with us? And I think that's the piece, that intentionality piece, that when we began this journey in 2016, I believe it was we started asking these questions. Let's start digging a little bit deeper and understanding, what are those individual personal values of our employees, and what are those perceived organizational values they have of the organization? what we learned was that the values really weren't that different than what already existed. But what was really interesting for us was that how people defined those values sometimes varied. And it became that much more critical for us, not only to understand what are those shared common values, but how do we define them, right? What do those values mean to us? And as Jim mentioned, what are the associated behaviors that you can expect to see when we're living those values, right? And that's the piece as we start to dig deeper within this culture work. The starting place is understanding those shared values that bring us together, because that's really where the magic happens, right? When there's purpose and values alignment, that's where you start to see organizations and people really, really flourish, right? The the piece that I often, I think about um, throughout our railroads journey is that in order to be a truly sustainable values-based organization, values need to evolve, they need to elevate, and they need to enlighten, right? And we need to continually have a sharp focus on understanding those values. And as we grow and we welcome new people into the organization, how are we nurturing those values? How are we recruiting and finding people that align with those values? Which is really what led to my work in my ELP here through the Masters in Leadership program. I wanted to take a look at it. How do we enhance the employee experience through values alignment? I talk a lot about employee experience because I really believe that in essence is what's important, is understanding what is that experience for each employee, and that experience might be different, good or bad. It's important for us to understand what is the experience that person has had with the organization, and are there opportunities for us, right? It's holding that mirror up in front of our face and recognizing that we're the ones that need to change, right? And what is it that we can do to make things a little bit better for someone else in the future? But when I think about enhancing that employee experience, what I really wanted to get at was the front end of the recruitment and the attraction piece, because as an organization, as I mentioned, we are continuing to grow. One of the things that has always surprised me is that in the past 11 years, we have not yet we've not yet needed to post a job posting for a frontline caregiver position ever, right? In our sector, in the disability services sector in Saskatchewan, recently statistics that I'm hearing is a roughly approximately 20 to 30% turnover rate that exists among fellow organizations in our sector. A few years back, when there was a bit of a different economic time here in the prairies, that turnover rate was more than 50%. But year after year, for the last 11 years, our turnover in our organization has been between 9 and 14%. 9 and 14%, a
Mm,
fraction of the provincial average. The other piece that I find really important as well is we take a look at that full-time turnover rate. It's actually only been between 5 and 8% annually. Also, an absolute fraction of that provincial average, right? And I believe this is because of the work that we've done with values, right? With a strong focus on purpose and values alignment, we've not had to post these frontline caregiver positions, right? In fact, week after week, we've received referrals and people applying for work that are wanting to join the organization, right? We have more people that have applied for positions that currently exist. And because of that, we're able to really understand and get to know who these applicants are. And through my ELP journey, it was how do we refine that, how do we be more intentional and really refine that front end piece? How can I assist the organization to successfully recruit and hire and onboard people to the culture that we've nurtured within the organization, right? And then further to that, how do we strengthen the culture by cultivating that values alignment among newly hired employees, right? And really looking at that recruitment and hiring practice and understanding well, where are people coming from? What, what areas, what interests, what partnerships, what connections do we have in the community that are introducing people to the work that we're doing? And how are we understanding who these people are and what is it that's attracting them to the work that we're doing as an organization, and why do they want to be a part of that, of this culture, right? Because this is really what's critical. As I mentioned before, we're in the business of people, right? That is our work. And we need to continually work to refine those practices, to ensure that we're recruiting and onboarding people that align with our culture and fit our culture, have a shared sense of common purpose. We also, need to look at how we nurture that employee experience throughout all aspects of that, of the employee's journey. And a part of that is also looking at some of those clunky HR pieces that really aren't um, optimal, if I say, particularly when it comes to performance management, right? And looking at, that piece when it comes to performance management doesn't really fit within the culture that we're trying to nurture, but it's critically important. And how do we transform that aspect of our work to align with the culture that we're trying to cultivate, right? And that's where you've seen the adoption of a coaching culture and working to nurture that coaching culture throughout the organization. That's also where we've taken the evaluative process and have turned it on its head, and have now looked at self-evaluation processes that are focused on key competencies for each position within the organization, doing away with those traditional 360 performance reviews that are all too common across the country, and really looking at a strengths-based perspective. How do we build people up in a meaningful, positive way, as opposed to, nurturing that culture of fear, which I believe a performance management system does just that. Um, this work that we've been doing and together through our Royal Roads journey, which is now we're nearing the end of a 5-year journey, has really helped us in not only shaping our leadership, our understanding of the important role that we play within the organization, but it's really helped us to better articulate and understand some of the key areas or aspects that we need to kind of maybe shine a bit of a light onto, and find a way that we can maybe do it a little bit different or make it a little bit better. And ultimately that comes back to understanding who are the people that are choosing to work with us, and why do they choose to stay, right? It's not about why they choose to leave, albeit that is important, but why do people choose to stay? And that's that piece about putting relationships at the core of our practice that's absolutely critical, and constantly evaluating what is our relationship with those who work with us and partner together with us. What is our relationship with those whom we provide care, our personal networks, and the families and of whom are entrusting us to provide care to their loved ones. It's really been a game changer for us, and understanding values at a much deeper level is really, in essence, helps support the growth, the continued growth and expansion of our services. But it's the people who work with us that are the ones that are really making the magic happen. Kathy, I'm not sure if you'd like to turn it back to you. And I believe there were some questions coming in.
Beautiful, absolutely. So thank you so much, Michael, and thank you so much, Jim, in terms of, it's really powerful in terms of just listening to some of your experiences. And, some of the words that popped for me were around intentionality, values and action, in terms of, the alchemy of transforming organizations, really in terms of values and purpose, and the magic of the people in terms of how that you do this. And so, yes, at this point now, this is a time that we're opening it up for everyone in terms of, if you have any direct questions. This is sort of the lively engaging part where we all get to lively engage together. And if there's any questions that you have, and there's some, I'm not sure if there's some in the chat box or if there will be some in the chat box, if you feel free to. I'm going to stop sharing the screen for a minute, just so that if people do want to speak or have a question in terms of anything that was raised, you can either hit your raised hand button, or you could even just, wave at us in terms of the screen. But this is your time to sort of have a conversation. So I'm going to actually start, though, as you're kind of maybe potentially thinking about your questions, is Selena has popped in a question from one of our registrants, which is, what is the best way to introduce the values-based initiative and trust within an organization with various departments without stakeholders feeling micromanaged?
Mhm. I mean, I could start off there if you like, and then Jim, you can weigh in. I always think, when I think back to trust, to me, it's safe plus valued equals trust, right? In order for someone to trust you, they need to feel safe with you and they need to feel valued by you. So when I think back to what is the best way to introduce this values-based initiative, to me, it's understanding, where are we at as an organization? What is our existing relationships with those whom we work alongside with each and every day? And that's the critical piece, is understanding and evaluating those relationships. I also believe it's important to have a discussion about values, in the sense, and what are those individual values and what are those perceived organizational values. And it's not about what's on the wall, because every organization has values listed up on their wall. The reality is, what we've experienced is that often those values are not living and breathing within the organization. There are a set of lofty words that one would hope they aspire, that the organization, hopes to aspire to, but do they resonate within the workforce? And I think that's the starting point, whether it's an entire organization or if it's one specific department. It's having those conversations about, who am I and what is it that I value? Who are you and what is it that you value? And what are those perceived organizational values? And when there's that connection, that's where the magic happens, right?
Thank you, Michael. And there's a couple other questions in the chat box, and I'm also, happy to flip back and forth in terms of if people want to also speak directly with Michael and Jim. So if you do, feel free to put up your hands and we can alter it back and forth. But in the meantime, we'll take them in order. And again, Gail too, if you even want to click on and speak your question. So that's also a possibility. If you don't, I'm happy to speak your question. So I'll give a second to see if you'd like to directly speak it. And if not, I will.
Absolutely, thank you. I will ask the question. Can you hear me okay?
Perfectly.
Excellent. Yeah, I was just interested in what you said about performance management and how damaging that can be. And I wondered, does that originate from the culture of the organization, or is there a way that it can actually be done in a non-threatening, productive manner?
Mm. I've got a few opinions. Jim, do you want to weigh in first?
Yeah, definitely. I think, like as Michael said earlier, everything we do is sort of woven within the culture of the organization, and we do want to extend that to our employees as well. And I mean, I don't think it's necessarily anything, too out of the box or overly special that we're doing. We're just trying to treat people like people. Those individuals that we're serving that have a disability, we want to treat our employees the exact same way. So I mean, when it comes to that performance management, I mean, we want to try and build people up as much as possible. What are you doing well? And maybe where are there some areas for growth? And a lot of that just comes into the way you approach it, the sort of mentality you take towards it, because so often in so many workplaces, there people are looking to kind of find deficiencies or take away marks from people, and it's like, how can we give you credit for the great work that you're doing, and being the right person for the job, which Michael talked about. When we're hiring the right people for the jobs, and if there is maybe some struggles there, how do we build you up to where you need to be? And if there are maybe some struggles where performance needs to be addressed, it's done in a very respectful manner. So we're just trying to, like I say, this culture transcends our entire organization.
Mhm. One of the pieces, building off of what Jim's saying, is when I think about, performance management, often, I mean, and I believe this is true, is that people, there's a sense of fear associated with an evaluation. There's a sense of fear of having to come into the office to see your review. There's always that fear of what's going to show up on that paper this year. When in reality, there should be nothing to fear, because if you were open and transparent um, with someone, there would, and the conversation itself would be predictable. I mean, how do we? I think if there's a culture of safety, there's a culture of fear, and often performance management systems sort of lend itself to that culture of fear. And when I think about the work that we're doing, it's making sure that there are clear expectations and clear understanding of what is expected of a person. And when it comes time for people to do that self-evaluation, what we know is that people tend to be far harder on themselves than anyone else ever will be. And they understand where their shortcomings are. They know the areas that they need to, maybe need some extra additional support with. And it's an opportunity for us to, pump their tires and celebrate the good things that they're doing and the contributions they're making, while also being able to offer and extend some support in areas that we can, as an organization, support them to strengthen and do better in areas they might be struggling with. It's how we approach the conversation that's critical, and it's from that strengths-based perspective, and helping people be, feel free of fear when coming to have some of those conversations that often are more challenging to have. Um, Ultimately, when you have that relationship with that person, and you have the ability to have that open, honest dialogue, there are no surprises, right? So it does come back to that relationship. And, as we grow, it gets harder. It gets absolutely harder, because there's almost 300 people. And we're constantly, for us, we're constantly evaluating um, what are the things that we need to do, where the, to ensure that we're making those connections and having that, trying to nurture or foster that relationship with those in the organizations. And this past year has been, tremendously difficult because of the pandemic. And of course, because our work is rooted in relationship, the pandemic has made it that much more challenging, because we've been forced to keep distance, right? It's been distancing or separating us from those, and trying to find creative ways to be able to connect. Ultimately, it comes down to connection.
Thanks,
Thank you so
Michael.
much, both of you. That was really interesting, really informative. It's given me plenty to think about, so I appreciate your answer.
Thank you.
And thank you for your question, Gail. So then I'm just going to go through the chat line. We seem to have a great running in terms of a speakers list. So Sandy, if you'd like to ask your question, or else I can, you're next to go.
Perfect. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, thank you.
Wonderful. Hi, Jim and Michael. Nice to see you again. The question that I've shown in chat is there a particular behavior, either net new or existing, that you've incorporated into your leadership styles as a result of this ELP work?
Yeah, sure. I can answer first here, Michael. Thanks, Andy. Good to hear your voice again. I would say for me, it's just sort of that kind of, renewed focus on hearing what people have to say, because a lot of the feedback that I received, like in the employee survey, which obviously was anonymous as part of my ELP, that a lot of people commented just this practice of asking us what we think is building trust in itself. So a lot of the folks that we've hired over the last year, since the pandemic started, me and Michael haven't had a lot of chance to spend time with them or meet them like we normally would. And so I think a lot of people, like newer employees, were blown away that, oh, my CEO and my COO actually care what I think. They want to hear from me. They want to, and when they actually start to see changes made on some of their feedback, like, I don't know if there's anything more powerful than that.
Mhm. I think that's an important piece there, Sandy, is that it's one thing to ask people for their thoughts and ideas, but it's another thing to actually execute and inquire to learn more with that, with the intent to try to do better, right? At the end of the day, yes, there are always organizational constraints and budgetary constraints and different factors, but what we've learned from people is that much of what they're hoping for and wanting and seeking out doesn't even cost much money, if anything, right? Which is incredible, right? Often it's are we taking time to slow down and to listen? And sometimes it's not even a matter of doing what somebody's suggesting, but perhaps giving them some understanding or perspective as to why we can't do that, right? Because that's something that has been, it's important for me. We get lots of good suggestions and ideas, and we try to incorporate as much as we can into the work that we're doing, but we can't do everything. And there are some things that is just impossible to do. But taking the time to help someone understand the why behind it is important. And that's something where I'm personally trying to do more of, taking the time to explain the why.
And I think
Thank you.
somebody might have their mic on. Oh, Selena, I'm not sure if you can see if we might want to mute someone. Oh, I think it might have gone now. The echo. Wonderful. Well, thank you, Sandy. And now, how about Nicole? Nicole, would you like to know more about your question?
I think with Gail's question, I got a lot of information there. So that was really great. So thanks for the feedback. And I'm hoping to take some of that into my organization here in Prince Albert, Saskatchewan.
Nicole, just to kind of build off of what we were sharing before, one of the key things that we did was we took a look at each role and identified the key competencies that are required to do that role, and then actually defined what that competency was so that it's very clear for people. And I think for each position, it's roughly around 8 key competencies that have been identified. When we first started drafting these or looking at what are the key competencies in a role, there were some had 12, 15 more key competencies, recognizing that that's just impossible. Trying to really focus in what are those key core competencies that are required to do that role. And once we were able to fine tune that, and I believe it's around 6 to 8 for each position, it's giving people the opportunity to then reflect on that one key competency and understand how well am I doing from my perspective, right? And what is it that I might need from you or from my supervisor or my employer to be able to do better.
Nice, thank you. So just a quick follow-up question to that. So you said you've got, obviously long-standing employees, given your turnover rate is quite low.
Mm-hmm.
Do you find, as you're doing performance evaluations over those longer period of time staff, are you changing those competencies or building more, say if there's been great accomplishment in those areas? Do we then kind of change what that looks like? Because in my organization, I work for Rancher Low, so you'd be familiar with that in Regina. We do have about 7 or 8 competencies, and I find, of course, it's this generic all the time. And I also have some long-standing employees and would like to know how can we build off what they already know, and maybe there needs to be other competencies that could be engaged there or changed or just something like that.
What's really important is when we looked at developing those key competencies, they weren't developed by Jim or myself or our HR department. They were actually developed in consultation with and collaboration with people who are doing those roles. My challenge for you would be to, if you were to sit down with a group of employees within a specific role, would they identify those same key competencies that you have identified? And if they don't, then that's an important conversation in itself, right?
Lovely.
Thank you very much.
We often think that, like, we often think we know the jobs. We have this vision of what this job looks like or what we think people are doing in the job, but what the person may be doing, and it might be a little bit different. So I think it's absolutely critical to ensure that the folks who are in those roles have a critical, are critical to developing those key competencies.
Excellent. Wonderful. So we've got about another 7 minutes with our Q&A, and we've got about another 4 or 5 questions. So I'll continue on. Robert, if you'd like to ask your question, otherwise I'm happy to.
Sure, I can ask it.
Wonderful.
Let's see. My question just has to do with how you've structured your well, both the self-evaluation procedures, and then also maybe kind of the behind the scenes needs of the organization. The reason I ask is I'm working at a middle level, so I've tried very much to have the self-evaluations take place for the people I supervise, but then there's always a sense of the needs of the organization that pulls their self-evaluations back into line with more traditional performance reviews, and so they evaluate themselves in the same way that maybe I would evaluate them if I was going off of the more standard methods. So I'm just curious how you've kind of structured the self-evaluation so that the employees feel safe, and how you've made some back-end changes to the way the organization works.
Jim, do you want to take a stab at this, or?
Yeah, I can share a little bit, and then I mean you can definitely add on. As far as like the structure of them, we would have them sit down and do their own self-evaluation. Give them, we would put it out to them and give them a week to fill it out and really take some time to reflect on how they're actually doing. And then we would they would sit down with their supervisor or someone else in the organization and really just work through what's going well, where is there maybe some area where we can continue to grow, but I mean, really, one of the real proponents of gentle teaching as our philosophy is that we want to look at ourselves first. And so that's, if you can look at yourself before you go and, judge someone else or look at their performance, that's kind of that sort of from the top down, that's where it's coming, where, sort of some of those things like empathy play into work. And even as you saw, like on my trust acronym, all of those things, like within our organization, it's very much the soft skills. Are we being empathetic? Are we being kind? Are we listening to people? Those are, for our organization at least, what seem to be the most important to people rather than some of the technical skills. Not that those aren't important, but it seems those soft skills seem to trump the technical at our organization.
I think building off that, and what Jim's mentioning is, we can hire we hire people for fit, and we can train them and to acquire the skills that they need to do the job. And I think that fit piece is absolutely essential. I think when we look at the self-evaluation process and helping people understand what are the goals and the objectives, or what is the vision of the organization as well, is critically important, because where do they see themselves in the organization, and where might they be aspiring to go within it? And it's not easy. It's a challenge. It's an absolute challenge, especially in a growing organization, helping to articulate that vision and helping people kind of rally behind where is it that we're going, and helping them to see where there's potential opportunities for themselves to be able to grow within the organization as well. You always want to instill hope, right? And inspire people to look, to the future. And I think in order to inspire someone within an organization, they have to see themselves as being a part of a greater sense of purpose, right? And making that difference. And that's the piece that, where do they see themselves in the organization, and where do they see a path for that continued contribution, right? That's that purpose piece that's so important and meaningful to people. It isn't always about the wage, right? It isn't always about the money and the benefits. Those are important pieces. And I think we talk about compensation, we have to talk about total compensation, because all those pieces are important, for people. But what really is critical is that people need to feel valued, they need to feel respected, they need to feel as though they're making a difference. They need to know that they're a part of something bigger than themselves, and that each and every day it's giving them that sense of fulfillment.
And then to add on to that too, Michael, like that self-reflection piece when we're doing an evaluation or a performance review, like looking as someone's supervisor, maybe there's something you can be doing that can be helping them get to be where they need to be if they're not quite there yet. So I think that's really important to examine as well.
You know, one of the biggest challenges that we face, to be quite honest, is that there's this preconceived kind of idea, or this notion of what work should be. And people, of course, when they join the organization, they're coming with a history of prior work experience that maybe wasn't, you know, it's quite different from the experience that we're introducing them to. And we're always, you know, struggling in the sense that people are always looking and saying, well, this isn't what I'm used to, or this isn't something that you know, it's always kind of waiting for that, well, when's the, you know, the floor going to fall out from beneath me because this is too good to be true, right? Because people's past work experiences shape their attitudes and perceptions on what an employer should be and do for their employees, and what we're offering is an alternative, right? And because, you know, I don't believe what we're doing is you know, overly special in a way. It's just really looking at how can we nurture and support this workplace environment that's one that I want to be a part of, and that we hope you would want to be a part of too, right? It often comes back to power and control, right? And one of the things, there was a question around organizational structure, is what are we doing to try to intentionally, you know, create a more flat hierarchy or a flat structure. And of course, there always is going to be, you know, some semblance of hierarchy in an organization. But, you know, how can we try to turn it on its head and try to make it as flat as possible to empower people, as opposed to be disempowering?
Excellent. And I also have Derek, who's also on the line, who had direct messaged me. So he was actually in the queue next. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over, Derek, for
Thanks,
you
Kathy.
to ask your question.
Yeah, hopefully you guys can hear me okay.
Yes.
I'm new here. Thanks for having me. Very, very interesting conversation, very helpful. My question's with regards to, we're just in the midst of implementing, so large healthcare in Ontario, implementing a just culture strategy across the organization. So very good news, aligned a lot with what you're talking about today. And then, of course, with the pandemic and travel restrictions, our CEO was let go because he did not listen to the rules of the travel restrictions. And so that's obviously a big loss of trust. And I'm just wondering if you had any advice on how to continue the momentum, how to maintain that trust in our staff during such a weird time.
You know, I guess one of the comments that I would make is, sometimes it's important to just acknowledge that the trust may be lost. I think it's important to acknowledge that what we've just experienced is hard, and that there may be a loss of trust because of this, and help people understand that's the starting place, right? Because what happened may or may not have been okay, and it's important to acknowledge that, so people can come together and say, well, I don't think that was okay, right? And find that common ground to be able to move forward.
Yeah, and I think you've also addressed something that's really important, Derek, which is, you know, leaders got to walk the talk. You know,
Yeah.
if, you know, you've got to model the way. If you're not, there's a breach of trust in that very much. I jumped in simply because I see it's 4 minutes to. We still have some questions, and so I think there's a couple ways. If, you know, either we could, you know, see if people are willing to take an extra 5 minutes on the webinar, and see if we can, you know, quickly, you know, at least give an overview in terms of those answers. And when I say we, I mean Michael and Jim. And then just to sort of close out with the how and why of leadership education. Or else we could ask, you know, Jim and Michael just to respond to those questions, and I can have them post it somewhere for people as well. So I guess I'll throw it to Michael and Jim. Are you good with, you know, taking an extra 5 minutes and seeing if you can answer the questions in the chat?
Yeah, it's not a problem for us.
Okay, well then maybe just as a real quick, if we look at it, there's, I want to know more about the self-evaluation. Thanks, Marie. There's also the love the tackling gossip. Can you talk more about an example that would work in your organization? And there's can you speak briefly about the gentle teaching certification? Although I would say that's probably beyond at this point, other than maybe if you can give some details. So I think those are kind of the three, if you don't mind working on that. And then I also know, I guess the fourth one too, I know that you also had suggested that there's also different ways that people can access programs. I was just thinking about the certification of this through different organizations. And I don't know if you want to speak to that as well.
I'll just, quickly, the general teaching aspect, we're one of a handful of organizations here in Canada that are rooted in this philosophy of care. It's far more commonly practiced in Western European countries. There is a training, various trainings and opportunities for learning about this philosophy of care. And if you go to our website at creativeoptionsregina.ca, there is a tab that talks about educate, and there's some information about the different trainings and information there, as well as there's an abundance of resources at General Teaching International. That's generalteaching.com, where you can download a number of resources as well. Jim, do you want to maybe talk about the tackling gossip piece?
Yeah, absolutely. I can do that. So yeah, that one, I mean, as our organization has grown to, as Michael said, almost 300 employees now, that like most workplaces, that does become an issue, and it was identified in my project. So so that's where, kind of that key tackling gossip, where we want to, speak kindly to people. The biggest thing is addressing it with the right people. And we often say, like, when we're looking at, individuals that we're serving, we say they're only as strong as the team that is providing that care and support to them. So if there is an issue, if there is something that's troubling you, I mean, take it up with the person that you have the issue with. And we've also, talked about where in the past we have offered, as a training, one of course trainings like a conflict resolution, just giving people the tools and education to be able to work through any work-related things that could lead to gossip.
Like Jim mentioned before, it's about the soft skills, and providing opportunities for education, learning, and development of those skills is absolutely essential, and nurturing that culture of continuous learning. I think that's critical to the culture that we've been cultivating, is that there's opportunities for growth and development at all levels, not just specific to the role, the job that you're doing, but to help continue to build on those soft skills, so people feel that they're always learning and offering up new opportunities for growth and development at a personal and professional level.
Beautiful. I think that takes us right to 1 o'clock. And I think in terms of answering those key questions, I believe that you have answered them all, and really appreciate in terms of that piece, Jim and Michael, and everybody who's contributed in terms of the dialogue. And what I'd like to do is just kind of take the last, 4 minutes now in terms of pulling us the full circle in terms of, so where potentially does this take us? And so I'm going to just share my screen again and share that and see if it's there. Yes, it is. Good. And so I'll move over here and basically just in terms of, oops, there we go. In terms of a summary around, so what does all this means? Whitnower identified a mythology in the Western world, what he deemed genius without learning. And that's the false notion that genius does not need study, exposure to work, or to exposure to others, or craftsmanship. And it does. And this is one of the key things about having colleagues and those pathfinders who have moved before us, and really having that mentorship and moving back and forth in terms of learning and leadership in especially uncertain but also emergent times which we find ourselves in. And so, just listening to Jim and Michael, it can really pull out a lot of what happens within our leadership program in terms of really looking at how to enhance people's own character and competence in terms of inside out learning, through real world challenges, through making connections, through through walking the talk. And then you can see how all of that can lead in terms of incorporating trust and really being able to move an organization forward. And so one of the things that we're currently offering, and I noticed that that we also have Vic, who is online, who's one of our faculty in the program. And we have a Master's of Arts in Leadership, Executive Leadership Specialization coming up. It launches April 9th, or sorry, April 19th is when it actually launches. And prior to the deadline, I should pause. I'm just so excited. I'm trying to finish all this off. But just to let you know that the first term of it is our graduate certificate in values-based leadership. So you can certainly take a deeper dive on the website. And if you'd like to speak further in terms of what that might mean in terms of you and your own development, you can contact enrollment services. You can contact myself. And just to let you know that this is a program, values-based leadership certificate, that has been running for 8 years. Shout out to Dr. Marilyn Taylor, who was the founder of the program and continues to serve in working collaboratively on providing sort of this unique and effective executive leadership specialization. We also have an amazing advisory committee, and it's really a way to, again, help leaders deal with these really important issues that they're dealing with currently, and have sort of new mindsets and new skill sets that are needed at this point. So just conscious that I want to end as closely on time before we say a final farewell. I just wonder if Michael, Jim, and I'll even throw it open to Vic as well, if any of you would like any final parting words. So.
A mentor of mine once said, without safety, there is no learning. And I think that's critical. And I think it applies in so many ways to organizational cultures, is that without safety, people are not going to flourish. And we need to focus on safety. And I'm not talking about physical safety. I'm talking about emotional safety, that sense of feeling safe. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Really appreciate having you here, and all the great work you're doing and your organization's doing. Jim?
Yeah, I just want to thank everyone for allowing us to share, and it's just, it's been such a great experience to be able to put, all these things that we're learning into practice in our organization, and just all of the, what goes beyond the learning at Royal Roads was just all the connections that we made, like, Vic and Marilyn, who have, supported us both in our academic program and beyond. So it's been an awesome experience.
Great. Vic, did you have a word or two that you would like to share?
Yeah, thanks, Kathy. Way to go, Jim and Michael. Thank you for this. This is awesome. And certainly we can see how you got the value stuff and how that underpins decision-making and all of the work that you're doing. And thank you for the good work that you're doing. So I don't want to take any more time, but I was just here to kind of watch and root and congratulate you on a great presentation. Loved it. Let's keep in touch some more. It's been a couple years or so come on. Yeah, let's back over to you, Kathy. Thanks for the opportunity.
Beautiful. And again, a real, heartfelt thank you to all of you for attending, and for people who are listening as well. Thanks to Lena for your wonderful help in terms of making sure this webinar ran smoothly, but also to know that, really appreciate this is a different type of program. It's a different type of education in terms of, it really calls for us to make change in the world. It calls for us to step up and really lead in terms of who we are. And so it heartens me to know that there's so many people out there that are seeking to make change. So I really thank you all for taking the time. Your time's incredibly valuable. And if there's anything we can do in the future, please do connect with us. But thank you so much. Have a wonderful day.